everyone, I hope you're having a great start to the week. I've nearly had this channel for 5 years and I've realised that in that 5-year period I've never made a video where I sit down and talk to you about all of the books that I've written and that have been published. I've spoken about individual books in individual videos, but I've never talked about them all in one place. So I thought that I would do that today. When I started this channel 5 years ago, I had 4 books published and now I have 9 books published. I write non-fiction books, I write for both kids and adults, I write short stories, poetry, and a whole variety of things. So I'm going to talk about all of the books that I've written today in chronological order because that seems to make the most sense. And if you would like to go out and check out one of these titles, if you haven't read any of my work already, that would be amazing. It helps obviously support my writing career and also supports me and this channel. So you can find these books at your local bookshop or library, and I'll also leave links in the description box down below. So let's start at the very beginning. I've mentioned in a few other videos that I've written since I was tiny, and I had several pieces published when I was a young teenager, and then when I was an older teenager I went to Edinburgh Uni to study English Lit, and when I was there I got a part-time job working in a bookshop to fund life, and I was working on getting short stories and poetry published at that time and continued to do that once I graduated. I left Edinburgh, moved down to London and was running a bookshop, and when I was doing that I was submitting to literary journals, I was getting placed in competitions, and I had lots of things published in different places, not in book form, but I was starting my writing CV, and I talked about that in my How to Get Published video, which I'll link down below if you would like to go and take a look at that. If you're especially writing poetry and short stories, you need to submit to journals and competitions at the beginning of your career. So I was doing that, and then I secured an agent, my lovely agent Charlie, for my fiction work. But at the same time as that was going on, as I said, I was running a bookshop and I'd started a blog where I was talking about lots of different things, reviewing books, but one of the things I was doing was I was talking about the strange things that happened to me when I worked as a bookseller. And those were strange requests that people asked me, or strange things that people said. Once someone asked me if books could conduct electricity. Once a young girl said to me, "Can I get to Narnia through here?" and pointed to a bookcase. And when I said, "I'm really sorry, it doesn't work for getting to Narnia," she looked at me, wise beyond her years, and she said, "That's okay. Our wardrobe at home doesn't work for getting to Narnia either. Dad says it's because Mum bought it at IKEA," as though the Swedes were deliberately making non-magical furniture. Interacting with kids as a bookseller was my favourite thing. So I had this blog, which was quite fun to do, and completely by accident it went viral, and I was contacted by a publisher asking if I would like to turn this blog into a book, and that wasn't something I'd ever thought about before. That wasn't what I was pursuing as my writer career, but I decided to do that. I thought it would be a fun thing to do and a way to learn a lot more about the industry from the writer side, so I said yes. And I published 2 books with Constable and Robinson, who are part of Little Brown, who are part of Hachette. Weird Things Customers Say in Bookshops, and More Weird Things Customers Say in Bookshops. These books are quite unlike any of my other books because they are humour, because they're more, well, quite literally anecdotal, but I had a lot of fun writing them, and I wouldn't change them being my first books, even though they weren't the things that I had been working towards. As I said, I got to learn a lot about the publishing industry, I got to tour around, and it was a lot of fun. So that was in 2012 and 2013. The first book was 2012, the second one was 2013. And also in 2012, in the other part of my writing life, I got a book deal for this pamphlet here, which is the Hungry Ghost Festival. This is a pamphlet, which is a collection of about 25 poems, I think, and this is published by the Rialto. This is now out of print because generally with poetry, what tends to happen is that you, as I said, you start sending out to journals and you get published in journals and competitions, then you compile this, which is like a mini collection, which gets published, and then you work on your first full-length collection, which is a whole book, which is about 70 pages long. And once that book comes out, this tends to go out of print. We did several print runs of this, and it was really lovely to do, and a little bit of my heart is tied up in this book. But yeah, you can't get this anymore. You may be able to find some copies hiding around some parts of the internet, I don't know, but certainly from the warehouse and from the publisher and me, we don't have any more copies anymore. But this was a collection of poems that were very nostalgic for me. A lot of them were about growing up by the sea and childhood, but then a lot of those themes carry on in my later work too. So I'm going to talk about my poetry more when I talk about the book that's still actually available, because I think maybe that's more helpful. So yeah, this was my first poetry book. My fourth book was published just as I started my booktube channel, and that was the Bookshop Book. So as I said, I enjoyed doing the weird things customers say in Bookshops books, but they showed a very small part of bookseller life. Maybe a slightly cynical side of bookseller life, and I wanted to show the wonderful side. I wanted to talk about all of the wonderful people that I had met when I went on book tour, and then look further afield as well at all the strange bookshops around the world. So I have a particular soft spot for traveling bookshops, so bookshops on boats and on buses, bookshops on donkeys as well, and bookshops on dragons, which I'll get onto in a second. So this book here looks at 300 bookshops from around the world and the weird and fantastic things that they do and the extraordinary people who run them. It's also about the history of books and bookshops as well. And this isn't supposed to be a comprehensive list of all of the best bookshops in the world. That's absolutely not what this book is. This is just a handful, more than a handful, several handfuls of fantastic stories from people that I've spoken to and have researched. So let me give you a couple of examples. Sarah Henshaw runs the Book Barge, which was in Lichfield, is now in France, and now that it's in France, it's called Le Book Barge. She has a bookshop bunny called Napoleon Bunnypot. She took the book barge all around the canals of the UK. We open the book with Sean. If you've read his new book is Confessions of a Bookseller. Is it called Life of a Bookseller, his first one? Diary of a Bookseller, that's it. Sean Blyfell, who runs the bookshop in Wigtown. So Bookshop towns in here. If you haven't heard of Bookshop towns, they are towns that have been converted into bookish tourism places to save themselves. So for instance, maybe the town's had a particular industry that's disappeared. Collectively, its residents have decided to convert all their living rooms, all their entire houses into bookshops. And so people come to visit them because they now have 20 bookshops on one street. Wigtown is one of those places. That is where this book opens after a brief history of the book and book selling. And the people who work in book towns are, I just think, so extraordinary and wonderful. Let me show you a picture, because there are some photos in here as well in the middle section of Fjordland, which is a book town in Norway. I wrote about bookshops in war zones. I wrote about the history of Shakespeare and Company. I wrote about the oldest bookshop in the world, the smallest, the largest. I wrote about Walter Swan, who self-published his book, then opened a bookshop that only sold copies of that book. And I wrote about Sebastian, a French guy who moved to Mongolia, gave his wife a bookshop as a wedding present, and now they run this bookshop in the middle of the Mongolian steppe, selling books in dozens of different languages to anyone who wants to come and visit them, including herders of the Altai Mountains and the Gobi Desert, which include the Kazakhs, the only known people in the world who hunt alongside golden eagles. Yeah, so this book is just full of stories of amazing people and fantastic facts about books throughout history. So if that sounds like your cup of tea, check it out. The Bookshop Book was published in 2014, and then I had two books that came out in 2017. The first of them was this one here, which is my first collection of short stories for grown-ups, and it's called The Beginning of the World in the Middle of the Night. This copy looks very loved and bashed about because it's the copy that I took with me on book tour. The hardback came out in 2017 and the paperback came out in 2018. So this is a collection of 12 short stories. Many of them are inspired by fairy tale, but they are not fairy tale retellings. They contain characters who use storytelling as a means to justify the sometimes questionable things that they are doing. There are threads of magical realism running throughout many of these stories. A lot of these stories are also to do with bodily difference, which is a topic that is very dear to my heart. There's queer representation in here as well. The first story in the collection is called Animals, and it's about a world where you can buy hearts online, animal hearts, and then you can put those hearts into either yourself or your loved ones. And it's about a world where love is dwindling and people have commercialized love to such an extent that it's become a very brutal thing. And the narrator in the first story is definitely someone who has lost touch of what love really is, and it has elements of Frankenstein in it as well. The title story in this is a script about two people who are just having a conversation in the middle of the night. There's a short story in here called Plum Pie, Zombie Green, Yellow Bee, Purple Monster, which is about teenagers who are sent to a summer camp for people who have plants growing out of their bodies. And I've made a whole video where I've talked about that story, and you can also read it, so I'll link that down below. And the final story in this collection is called Bright White Hearts, and I did an audio recording of that for the Women's Prize for Fiction, and you can listen to that on their website, so I'll also link that down below. If you like dark, creepy little tales, then I think that this will be the one for you. The book that also came out in 2017 was the first in my children's picture book series, Franklin and Luna. So the first one is called Franklin's Flying Bookshop. This is a series of 3 picture books I've done with Katie Harnett, and Katie and I have made some videos before where we've talked about the creation of these books, so I'll link them down below. Franklin, I'm often asked about age ranging and age groups. We say that the Franklin books are primarily for children aged 3 to 7, but are ultimately for anyone of any age who loves dragons and books. And who doesn't love dragons and books? So the first book, Franklin's Flying Bookshop, is where we are introduced to Franklin, who is a book-loving dragon. So it says, Franklin loves stories. Stories keep him warm at night. His front door is a bookcase that keeps out the wind. There are lots of books in the cave that Franklin lives in. He likes to read them out loud for everyone to hear. But the problem is that Franklin doesn't have any friends to read stories to, because all the villagers are terrified of him, until one day he meets a young girl called Luna, who isn't scared of Franklin because she's read all about dragons in books. So together the two of them come up with a plan to build a bookshop on Franklin's back and take it to the local villagers and show them the power of empathy and not judging people. And yeah, so that is the first one in the series, and that came out in 2017. And this came out in 2018, which is a sequel, Franklin and Luna Go to the Moon. In this book, we open with Luna and her pet tortoise, Neil Armstrong, and we follow their adventure as, together with Franklin, they travel around the world trying to find Franklin's family. Franklin is 605 years old, and he can't remember where he grew up. So, on their journey, they find 20 yetis eating spaghetti, 5 vampires reading Shakespeare, 2 giants playing chess and poltergeists in fancy dress, elves playing volleyball, nymphs for skipping ropes, tiny pixies throwing frisbees under microscopes, 2 fairies in ice cream vans, witches baking cherry pie, disco dancing unicorns on roller skates, oh my. But they don't find any dragons until one day Neil Armstrong points at the sky and they see something moving far away. So they decide to go and investigate, and spoiler, they go to the moon. So this again is for kids aged 3 to 7, or for anyone else who loves dragons and books. The third book in the series, out 2019, is Franklin and Luna and the Book of Fairytales. And you probably guessed I was going to try and get Fairytales into the Franklin series in some form, in some bookish way. So in the first book, Franklin's Flying Bookshop, Franklin makes friends with Luna and the villagers. In the second one, Luna and Franklin find Franklin's family. In the third book, everyone comes together, and there's also a new adventure. So we open, it's Franklin's birthday. He's turning 606. He's worried his friends have all forgotten. They haven't sent him any gifts. However, no one has forgotten. Luna and everyone is planning a surprise party. So to distract Franklin from all of the party preparations, Luna takes Franklin to a bookshop out of town. It's owned by a lady in a velvet dressing gown. There are spiders wearing spectacles who organise the shelves. There are books from every topic, from art to magic spells. It's one of Franklin's favourite places. And while they're there, Neil Armstrong, Luna's pet tortoise, is very naughty. He opens a book of fairy tales that's locked with a padlock and a sign that says "Don't open." And when he opens it, he disappears inside. Not figuratively, literally, he is sucked inside the book. So Franklin and Luna have to dive into the book after him to save him. And on their adventure, their quest, they meet lots of fairy tale characters, not all of whom are friendly. So will they find Neil the tortoise and make it back in time for Franklin's birthday party? It's so tense. So very tense. I have had such fun working on the Franklin and Luna series with Katie Harnett, who illustrates it, and these are published by Thames and Hudson. I'll link the videos that Katie and I have done together in the description box down below. The 9th book that I have to show you, the final book that I have, is also one that was published in 2019, and that's my debut poetry collection, The Girl Aquarium, which was published, or is published, by Blood Axe. I would say the themes in this book are girlhood and nostalgia, bodily difference and othering, the history of the freak show, a little bit of folklore thrown in for good measure. It's hard to talk about your own poetry, I suppose, so I'm going to insert some quotes from other people on the screen here as well. I think the best way to decide whether or not this collection is for you is to read some sample poems. So I have some sample poems on my website. I've also made videos on the Blood Axe website where I have given readings of some of the poems. So I'll link those in the description box down below, and you can work out whether or not you think this is your cup of tea. Poetry, I think, is still the thing that is most dear to my heart, and I'm very proud of this book. I'm very proud of all of these books. I think because that one is the newest one, apart from the New Franklin one. I feel, I don't know, a protectiveness over it that because it's so new. At the moment I am working on several other new books, including a novel which I will be able to talk about in due course, but I thought it made sense to talk about all the books that are already published. And as I said at the beginning of the video, if you haven't read any of my work before, or perhaps you've read some of it and not others, it would mean so much if you could purchase one of my books or pick up a book at your local library. I will leave details in the description box of all of these books. All of the books, apart from the poetry collection, are available in lots of different languages as well. So you can find details of the languages that they're available in on my website. Oh, quick add-on, I also ship signed copies of my books to anywhere in the world from my website, and I can dedicate the books to whoever you like. I thought I would just mention that in case that is of interest. I really am going to go now, and I have a new end screen too, so here is the new end screen. I hope you're having a great start to the week, and I'll speak to you later. Lots of bookish love. Bye!